Customer-supplier relationship. My name is Waidera from Codarasa. Today we're going to look at customer-supplier relationship, which is one of the ways you can do context mapping in your domain-driven design system. It's a relationship where there's the supplier that is usually upstream and a customer that is downstream. Let's learn more about it, but first let's look at an example. For instance, here we have a student, after maybe some changes are made, they will maybe send a message to another system downstream, which is, for instance, teacher. Every time a student is created, as a teacher, I would need to have that information. In this case, the student is the supplier and the teacher is the customer. Upstream, downstream. It occurs every time a system needs information from another system. The direction is one system that is usually upstream is the one feeding information to another. It can happen where this now downstream system is needed by the upstream one for a different thing, but then that will still now inverse the relationship where technically not inverse, but if there's a scenario where now the downstream system in this example is needed by the upstream system, then it will also be viewed as a different customer-supplier relationship where now this downstream is now the upstream and the upstream is now the downstream. Like you've seen, for instance, here where the student created information from the student is both needed by the teacher and by the class bounded context in this respectively. Teams will always need to feed into each other and the flow will ideally be one way. One team needs the other and trusts they maintain a particular way of doing things. There need to be trust in this scenario because I am trying to work with a specific model, I am working with a specific schema. So if you change it out of the blue, then I will crash my system. I will end up with a case where I can't work with it, and that will cause more chaos than it should. The teams need to trust each other, and not to mean that the other team will never make changes that will impact this one, but at least inform the other team beforehand, let them know. Also, that also means when the downstream needs some changes from the upstream, they can also go to them. There is some relationship in this scenario. It can't be a case where there's no close relationship between the teams. Otherwise, it will not work effectively. Ideally, the supplier controls the relationship because they're the one giving the customer, they're the one providing what the customer needs, which leaves the customer having to go out of their way to keep up with the supplier's ways. Again, if you're the one giving me information, it is my job to try and ensure that I keep up with you for my needs. So in this case, who rules? Is it the upstream team? Is it the downstream team? Clearly, it looks like the upstream team is the one winning in this case, but let's look at it further. Sometimes the upstream may feel inhibited to make changes. If I have many people relying on me, or even if I have a team relying on me, I may be hesitant to make changes because I feel I may break their system. That may be causing an issue on the upstream team. Technically, you're still inhibiting me. Yes, you're the one who needs me, but I don't feel like I can just make changes the way I would have done if you were not needing me in the first place. And on the other side, the downstream may feel helpless because they feel they're at the mercy of the upstream team. What you'll find in such a scenario is that the downstream needs the upstream, but remember, it's not the work of the upstream team to be concerned about their deliverables. They also have their own problems to be dealing with. They have their own KPIs. They shouldn't give your needs too much more attention because they don't have the capacity for that. What's the way forward? The downstream team still needs information from the upstream team. It's very essential that they still give the information in a practical way. And the upstream team needs to be able to still work without feeling inhibited. In this case for rules, the upstream still needs to be able to go about their way, yet they still need to provide information to the downstream team because it is essential for the whole company to have this sort of association be very functional, because at the end of the day, I can't be the one, like you're in charge of creating that data. The least you can do is make sure I'm also able to use it for my needs, and also you shouldn't again feel inhibited, and also the downstream shouldn't feel like it's such a stretch every time they need some information from the upstream team. How do you successfully do this? For one, having a clear relationship between the teams is very essential. Imagine a case where you're trying to have such a relationship with a team where you hardly interact with, you don't have a good relationship with, then that would be a very chaotic situation because you're trying to table your demands as the downstream team, and the upstream team will not care for it. So then that brings some sort of issue, some sort of conflict between the two teams, and of course then it also affects the company work. Another way you can be effective in this is, as the upstream team, you can invite parties from the downstream team to come to your planning meetings, because they are now ideally one of sort of your customer. They will learn some of the changes that are going to come their way, and they can maybe plan for that beforehand, get to discuss downstream requirements so that meeting their needs is planned for, because you also need to put that in your planning. You still have your own maybe team objectives, team goals. You also try to maybe schedule it in so that it's also accounted for when you're planning for your tasks for the upstream team in this case. Another way to effectively have this relationship is developing acceptance tests jointly. So both teams, that is the upstream and downstream, will come together and create some tests that need to be run. They do need to formulate them because they're impacting both teams in a sense, whereby this test will always be run on the upstream side every time they're running continuous integration. So every time maybe you've made changes on the upstream team, there will be continuous integration tests, and these tests will serve the role of ensuring that everything is as expected by, of course, the upstream team and the downstream team, because they did formulate this acceptance test together. That is one way where mostly the upstream team has influence, or now the downstream is bringing concerns to the upstream team. But you also have a scenario where a customer has a lot of sway, they have a lot of influence, causing the supplier to prioritize developing for them. I was working for a company where we had this really big client, and they wanted two changes. One is they wanted us to use their way of authenticating so that their employees feel like they have the same. Once I maybe have this general access to all my systems, I can also just get into our system in the same format. You don't have to now go try and log in a different way or feel like you're stepping out of the system. It's sort of still housed within the same applications you're maybe used to using in as an employee for that company. The other thing was we were supposed to match the color schemes they had, again, maybe to have that uniformity for their employees, for their customers to feel like they have this blend of, I'm working on the same system, even if it's an outside system, yes. Because they were a very big client, we felt the need to now serve for their needs, and we now created these custom changes for them, of course, in particular, not for everyone else, but we did this because they did have a sway. Sometimes the downstream will also have a higher sway, and that's just how it is. That is an example of how the downstream can also have a higher sway, and especially when you have to prioritize them, then you have no option but to cater to their needs above your needs in this scenario. If we had, for instance, maybe other plans, it will also be put a huge chunk of our time to now catering to their needs, because we want to keep them as a client because they do have a sway. And that's it on customer supplier relationship. I hope you've learned something. My name is Waidera from Kodarasa. Bye.